agree on the need for looking at other sorts of resource. We've heard a lot about, for example, the Athabasca tar sands. I was at a big meeting on the subject last week. That's obviously going to be a resource, but the penalty that you have to pay for using that resource is probably extremely, extremely high. But if you look at the other resources which are available to us, we've got, for example, nuclear. You've already heard a reference to it. There's a lot of pluses, there are certain minuses. You didn't talk so much about some of the new technologies, but the pebble bed technology, for example, now being developed in China and South Africa, holds considerable promise for the use of nuclear power. We don't really know how the development of fusion power is going to develop or not. You're perfectly right in saying that these are very expensive sorts of technology and it takes a very long time to develop them. And so far, costs are constantly rising. The Finns at the moment have got a huge program of nuclear power. It's constantly overrunning estimates and making difficulties, but it exists. So we are, in fact, already investing in that. We've got, of course, the development of biofuels. When the last president of the United States started subsidizing it, one of the unexpected effects, and there are always unexpected effects, was to increase the price of food and cause food riots all over the world because the technology which produced, or the agriculture which produced the biofuels, of course, had made food more expensive and deprived or reduced food supplies in certain parts of the world. So there's always, it's the law of unexpected consequences. You've got solar power. You've already heard that referred to. I think one of the interesting things about solar power, I don't quite take quite so gloomy a view as you, because some of the new solar technologies can be used quite effectively in this country, in spite of the fact that there is that thing called night when the solar power gets switched off, which indeed comes to the question of storage, an absolutely vital issue that you rightly mentioned. But solar power, there's a lot of interesting work, for example, being done on the idea of having huge solar panels, not just in this country, but in the Sahara. And there you've got, of course, the problem of how you convey what is generated into Western Europe as a whole. You've also got the huge problem of how you can store it, which indeed storage is absolutely one of the most difficult problems of all. Wind power, you've heard about. I won't have very much more to say about wind power, except there's a lot of current investment, maybe excessive investment, when you consider the various hazards that you have mentioned. Hydropower, tidal and ocean power, perhaps rather more promising than most people give it credit for. It's being tried in places like Florida. It's being tried in the Orkneys. It could even be tried quite close by, I think I forget which island it is. Is it near Lundy Island? Anyway, there are quite a lot of attempts being made now to harness that. Again, it's quite good, and the French were the first. I remember visiting a power station many, many years ago. Again, there are problems, but I think that probably can be resolved. There is geothermal power, which you also referred to. There again, there are certain advantages because there's almost limitless supply of thermal power underneath us at the moment, but use of it can be quite perilous. And it can be argued that where people have exploited thermal power, in fact, you can disturb the geological balance below our feet and produce untoward results and earthquakes and things. So we don't know about that. But it, again, is one of the things that can be exploited. And then we've got the whole question of what I would describe as electrification technology, in which we can try and generate electricity by a whole lot of means we haven't thought of before. Now, in looking at all these issues, I think we have to realize that the energy issue, and I want to remind you what I said at the beginning, is only one of the environmental issues. Contributions to changing some of the situations we like least come from agriculture, the use of nitrogen fertilizers, the way in which we use our cars, the way in which we use our buildings. All these things may contribute quite substantially to making things worse for us. And so when you get a new government coming along, you're going to have to realize that you can't just deal with any one of these issues by itself. You have to see them all together before you make proper sense of them. Now, I want to conclude by just talking briefly about the implications for policy, because there, I think you must agree, the Chinese have a point when they say that the only way to supply food, the only way to supply energy, which is what all governments have to do, is to use market forces within a framework of the public interest. The question is how you define the public interest. But it has to be done. Therefore, I think that it's quite interesting that some of the major oil companies are not so much talking now about market forces. They're talking about market forces within the framework of the public interest. And their governments have a huge responsibility, which is why after this election, we've got to decide, the government has got to decide how it's going to deal with this huge range of difficult issues. One of them, for example, is that you've got to consider what should be the incentives for developing one kind of energy against another, and the disincentives in which you could punish those that are in fact either causing more pollution or are, as it were, attracting people away from the right solutions. You've got to invest in a lot of technology. Again, how are you going to promote the technology which you have to invest in? How are you going to choose it? It's well known it's extremely difficult to do. But governments have got to look at all these things together. I didn't mention incidentally sea level rise, but that, of course, is also something that has to be included in our calculations. So when you come to Kent, what is going to happen in Kent? Well, you've heard a word or two about what's going to happen in Kent, and I do congratulate all concerned, the CPRE and its Kent offshoot, on what you have done to look at these things. But just a final word on this, what the prospects are. Kent is very vulnerable. Southern England is very vulnerable. I wouldn't ever say that any prediction could be relied upon, because when I make speeches on climate change, I always refer to climate destabilization and not to climate change as such. Climate destabilization means that all over the world at the moment, this combination of factors I've been talking about this combination is beginning to have quite considerable effects. The predictions for what they're worth for southeast England are that you're going to get warmer and drier winters and warmer and wetter summers. Whether that works out like that, I don't know. I've just been reviewing a book on the subject, which is trying to look forward to what things are going to be like 20 or indeed 50 or indeed 100 years from now. But there are all those things coming together. You've got to cope with that sort of suggestion, and then you've got to look at the after effects. Supposing that it is, as I say, warmer, drier summers and warmer, wetter winters, are you going to have to change the economy of the entire country? Are you going to, in fact, to find that migration will be coming in from other parts of the world that have been much more adversely affected than England or indeed the United Kingdom generally? Are they going to be able to is the present concentration on the southeast and London going to continue, or will in fact the focus of emphasis in Britain will move northwestwards, which a lot of people think it will, so that southeast England will become more like the bits of currently the northern Mediterranean? We don't know. We just don't know about these things, but we have to take into account so far as we can. I chair a body which looks into some of the climate effects for southeast England. It's not cheerful stuff. Above all, it's the destabilizing. It's the more storms, more droughts, and as I say, wetter in some parts of the year and drier in others. And somehow we have to work it all out. Now, when we have a new government, I hope they will sort it out. I hope they will be able to try and take a coherent, unified view, and I hope very much that the lights will stay on in Kent. Thank you. Now, under strict instructions, not to go on for too long, which I didn't, I hope, I also left a space if anyone wants to ask any questions or to contest anything that I said, and I would do my best to respond. Please.
My name is Richard King. I'm a member of Kent County Council. One thing you didn't touch on, which concerns me a lot, is that when I was born, the global population was something like 2.5 billion people, and it's now nearly 3 times that. You haven't mentioned the increase in the human population of the globe compared to the decrease in the populations of virtually everything else. And I would be grateful if you could give us your views on that.
Well, indeed, when I was born, it was about 2.5 billion. It's now 6.8 billion, and there are suggestions that it will go up to 9 billion, although I must say I'm pretty skeptical about the calculations. I think from the point of view of what you do about it, there are 4 big factors. And it all comes out rather well in a recent book by Fred Pierce called People Quake. And it shows that where you get the role of women